Pigeon Pair by J.T. Lawrence. "They're quite pretty things, really," says Juliet. Edward, intent on smoothing the marmalade on his cold toast in exactly the right way, doesn't hear, or ignores her, and she has to wave at him to break his trance. "This one isn't quite as good as the thick cut, but it is easier to spread," he says. The pair of pigeons coo. It's a gentle, happy sound. Their swiveling necks are iridescent. "Quite nice to have some birds around," she says. "The color is good. You want that golden hue, don't you? You want those strips of blood orange and pink grapefruit. You want that syrupy sheen." "Edward," says Juliet, "it's a most underrated condiment, I think. Sweet, with just the right amount of bitterness, and that tang, that citrus tang. Edward, will you snap out of it?" "Coo, coo," say the pigeons, beady black eyes watching the couple at the table below. "What?" he says at last, dragging his eyes off the jar and looking at her. "Did I miss something?" Sometimes Juliet thinks that she may as well eat breakfast on her own, for all the attention she gets from her husband. Sometimes she would say something, just something small, to make conversation, and he would flat out ignore her. Not an acknowledging glance, not a mumble of agreement. "I was just saying that the pigeons are quite pretty. I don't know why they have such a bad reputation." "Do they?" he asks, taking a bite of his vaunted toast. "Do they have a bad reputation?" He crunches and grinds the toast in his mouth. Juliet has to talk over the sound or she fixates on it. She hates hearing people chew. Apparently there is a scientific name for it. It's an actual condition. It drives her crazy. "Yes, people call them vermin," she says. In the past, she had asked him to try to make less noise while eating, and he had flung his head back and laughed. "How?" he had asked. "How does one do that? Even if I wanted to indulge this particular eccentricity of yours, how does one chew quietly?" She had not mentioned it again. He takes another bite and crunch, crunch, crunch. Like a car compactor. Like a bone breaking. Like stepping on crushed glass. "Vermin," he says. "That seems extreme." "Yes," she says. I agree." And she does. Misophonia, it's called. She read about it in a magazine. The irrational anger one feels upon hearing others eat. At least she wasn't the only one. His mouth must feel so dry with all that toast and sugar, she thinks. Doesn't he want some water? "Would you like some water?" she asks, lifting the glass jug. It drips with condensation. He doesn't answer. She pours it anyway. The pigeons, having had enough of the breakfast show, launch themselves with a clatter of wings off the boundary wall and into the bright sky. The Bentworths watch them fly away. "Anyway, you know that we need to stop buying that particular underrated condiment," says Juliet. "This?" he says, showing her his last golden square. "Sacrilege! Why would you say that?" "It's full of sugar," she says. "You know what your doctor said." "Oh, please," he says. "I've been eating sugar my whole life, and look at me." He beats his chest, Tarzan-like. "I'm as healthy as an ox." "Not according to Dr. Benson, you're not," she says. "And I don't want you to get diabetes." Edward grunts and looks away, rinses his mouth with a sip of cold tea. Juliet picks up the offending jar. "We shouldn't be buying this anyway," Juliet says. "It's imported from Paris." "So," he says, "that's what makes it good." "No," says Juliet. "It's irresponsible." "It's organic." "It's reckless." "Ha!" he says. "Now I've heard it all." "It's true," says Juliet. "Think of our trade deficit. We should really be buying local." "So our pretty birds are vermin, hey?" says Edward. "And now marmalade is reckless. Now I've really heard it all." "Shall I give them some of these toast crumbs?" "Don't you dare." "Why aren't you dressed yet?" asks Edward. He is wearing his tuxedo and is looking especially handsome. Steam is still pouring out of the ensuite. There's probably no hot water left. "Why am I not dressed yet?" Juliet says, looking down at her tracksuit pants stained with pureed butternut and crusted with bright blue bubble fruit toddler toothpaste. "Are you serious?" While Edward had skipped home from work and jumped right into the shower, Juliet had been wrangling the children. Emma had to be fed her baby slop and topped up with milk. Dean needed fish fingers and peas, which was more of a theoretical exercise in eating than actual eating, seeing as they all landed up on the floor. Juliet had given up and made him 2-minute noodles with tomato sauce for what was now the third night in a row. Then they both needed to be bathed and dressed and made ready for bed, which was always an exercise in patience and steel determination, especially with a 1-parent to 2-kid ratio. The saying about herding cats always came to mind, but a glance at Layla, the family cat, snoozing peacefully on the couch, made Juliet feel that herding cats would certainly be easier. A bit of smelly tuna and shaking some kibble in a bowl would probably do the trick. The kids, her homemade gremlins, required considerably more effort. "Where's the babysitter?" he says, angling his chin up to the ceiling and looking in the mirror to inspect his freshly shaven throat. "She'll be here at 7. He shakes his watch down his arm and looks at the face, picks up his phone, ready to check the Premier League results. "You can make their milk and go in and read them a story," says Juliet, taking off her stained cardigan, "while I make myself presentable." "It had better be a long story," he says, winking at her. She throws her top at him. It hits him square in the face, and he catches it as it falls. "Oh," she says, "before I forget, the pigeons are back." "Are they?" "And they brought a few friends with them. Is it a problem?" "I don't think so. They're entertaining anyway for the kids. I show Dean how to shoo them away, and it keeps him occupied for ages." Edward shakes Juliet awake. She opens her eyes but sees nothing. "What's wrong?" she says, heart and throat. "Is something wrong with one of the kids? Has someone broken in? Why didn't the house alarm go off?" "Can you hear them?" he demands. Juliet tries to listen, but all she can hear is her pulse banging in her ears. "What?" "It's the birds. It's those bloody birds." "A dream?" wonders Juliet out loud. "You can't hear them. It's like they've nested right next to my head. I can't sleep with them making such a racket." Juliet hears them. Enthusiastic cooing, wing adjusting, sharp claws grubbing on tin. "I can hear them," she says. She looks at her phone. 4:30 a.m. Looks like we have ourselves a new alarm clock. "Mama," says Dean, sleepwalking into the bedroom. She jumps out of bed and swoops to catch him before he tumbles down the 2 stairs, brings his warm body into bed with him, kisses his head. "Coo, coo," say the birds. "Ed, you there?" says Juliet into the receiver. "Ed?" "I'm just walking into a meeting. It's been a hell of a day so far. Can we chat later?" "It's the pigeons." "You're calling me because of the pigeons?" "They've made such a mess. There's just feathers and sticks and bird shit everywhere, all over the outside furniture. The settee, the shelves, the flat screen. Can't you just, shoo them away?" "Shoo them away? There are like 20 of them." "Didn't you say the Dean loved chasing them away?" He does it all day. It's practically his part-time job. He's not even 2. "You said it was cute." "It used to be cute. He puts his arms up and stomps on the floor, like a gumboot dance, very effective, but even he can't keep up with the way they're flocking in here." "Let me go into this meeting. I'll try and get back as soon as I can." Says the man in the bright yellow overall. He sucks his pencil and narrows his eyes and inspects the eaves where the pigeons have been nesting. Dirty patches on white timber trusses where birds' feet have been dancing the cha-cha. He makes some notes. "I can see they've already caused some damage," he says, eyeing the flat-screen TV with a disapproving look. I probably should have called you sooner, says Juliet. The man says. The timber floor decking underneath the eaves is an abstract painting. Jackson Pollock in guano. The yellow man sniffs. He does not appreciate the artistic merit. The logo on his overall is the same as the picture on his van. A cheerful-looking pigeon holding a suitcase and saluting, as if he is leaving for a quick island holiday. As if these yellow men are really travel agents for burnt-out birds. 9,000 rand, says Edward, hitting a button on his keyboard over and over again, as if to correct a mistake. I know, says Juliet. It's ridiculous. Are you sure they didn't send us the wrong quote? He says, hand over brow. It's the netting that's expensive, and the spikes, and the labour. Netting and spikes? Is that really necessary? I don't want all this stuff cluttering our space. I spent a fortune on that outside area. I don't want it to look like we're living in bloody Fort Knox. It does sometimes feel like a prison, thinks Juliet. Is there no other way? I don't know. It does seem excessive. 9,000 rand. He did seem to know what he was talking about. Can't we find a way to chase them away ourselves? I've tried. Juliet had dug around in the kids' playroom and found a rubber snake, which she had placed in the bird's favourite spot. They just shat on it. They just shit on it, she says, tugging a strand of her hair. They just shit on everything. Edward was used to compliments on his house. They used to please him. My God, says his sister, almost losing her grip on her glass of wine before she'd had a sip. What on earth is going on here? You wouldn't believe it, says Juliet, bouncing baby Emma on her hip. I've become a gorilla. What the, she says, trailing off, taking in the odd new decorations. Usually she was proud of the fact that the Bentworths had exceptional taste, but the old CDs hanging like that, says Juliet, like 80s bunting, is to keep them away. The sun reflects off them and disorients them. Disorientates who? Says Sarah. You don't know? Know about what? Our problem, says Juliet. We have a feral pigeon problem, says Edward. I've put tinfoil on all the surfaces, says Juliet. I can see that, says Sarah. I chase them with a broom. I throw balls at them. They're so bloody stupid and so stubborn. Sometimes I get so angry I just wish I had a pellet gun. Now that's a good idea, says Edward. And I placed fake eggs everywhere. You know, because Google said that they won't nest in another bird's nest. Poor Dean got so excited. He thought we were going to have an Easter egg hunt. A pigeon dives in, dodges the CDs and lands on the tinfoil. Emma starts wailing. Juliet gets tears in her eyes. Juliet, are you okay? No, says Juliet. No, I'm not. Sarah, not good at comforting people, puts her glass down and gives Juliet an awkward hug. Pats the baby. You poor thing, she says. Don't worry. We'll sort these bloody birds out. A group of men in yellow overalls swarm all over the deck. Ladders are employed. Nail guns shoot their columns of steel into the wood with a satisfying bang. Strong black netting is rolled out, the opposite of a red carpet. Bird eviction, they call it, says Edward, looking cheerful despite not having slept well in days. I find that quite funny. Before their eyes, their minimalist and tastefully decorated outside area becomes a crazy quilt of pigeon prophylactics, ligatures, gauze, spikes. Once the pigeons have been dispatched, says Edward to the yellow chief, the man who sucks the pencil, can we get all this removed? Juliet sees the timber trusses being punctured, penetrated, perforated. Even if they remove the unwelcome deterrents, the deck will remain scarred. Sure you can, says the man, if you want them to come back. Edward pays him 10,000 rand. That evening, Edward and Juliet deposit the children in front of the television and drink an aperitif outside, trying to ignore the unsightly eviction gear. They want to see the pigeons swoop in and realize there is nowhere for them to nest. They want to see them get frustrated and fly away. The Bentworths have never considered themselves cruel people, but as they sip their scotches in silence, all they wish for is to see the pigeons lose hope. They wish for pigeon doom and despair. They swallow their drinks. The birds don't come. "Do you think it was enough to scare them away?" asks Juliet, as they lie in bed. She wishes he would hold her hand. When was the last time they held hands? The army of yellow men, I mean. Do you think the pigeons recognized them and just knew not to come back? "Maybe," said Edward, yawning. "He did say that he does a lot of work in the area." "So we've just chased them to some other unfortunate person's house." Emma fusses in the cot next to their bed, but settles down without reassurance. "Maybe, in future, we won't need all the terrible netting," says Juliet. "Maybe we can fill the holes and repaint." She waits for a reply, but Edward is asleep. She leans over him to switch off his bedside light. Juliet stirs, woken by the scratching. Pins on sheet metal. Before she is even properly awake, she knows the pigeons are back. How is that possible? She thinks. How the bloody hell is that possible? She gets up quietly as to not wake Edward or the baby. Fetches Dean's alligator torchlight, but not before stepping on a piece of Lego and gulping down a string of curses. Uses her remote to switch off the house alarm, but forgets the outside beams. She pads to the back door that leads to the deck, unlocks it, steps down into the cool, dark breeze, sweeps the toy light over the eaves which are free of birds, checks the furniture, the flat screen. The shadows are still and quiet. Had she imagined it? Had it been a dream? There was certainly no evidence of trespassers here. But then there is a flicker in her peripheral vision, which makes her jump. What? She thinks, and then she sees it. A pigeon on her clean white shelf, hiding. Playing dead? Juliet runs towards it to shoo it away, and it gets such a fright it explodes in a clatter of wings and feathers, knocking a flower vase off the shelf, which falls and shatters on the floor. The sound is jarring in the otherwise silent morning. The bird, discombobulated, flies into the wall, then finds his way out. His pitching signals the security beams and sets off the alarm. The siren caterwauls all around her. Emma and Dean are both startled awake and start crying. They both want her, but she is sweeping up the shards to protect their tender little feet. Edward tries to hold them back, and then his phone starts ringing, adding to the cacophony. He assures the security company that it was a false alarm. The armed men arrive anyway. The control room had sensed he had been acting under duress. "Coffee?" says Juliet. "Is that an offer or a demand?" asks Edward. "Here." She puts a double-shot espresso in his hand. He takes a sip. "Oh, this is good. What did I do to deserve you?" "I'm not sure you do deserve me," Juliet says. He knows she is not joking. "I'm taking the day off," he says, draining his cup. His eyes are red, puffy. He hasn't shaved in a couple of days. He's looking quite grey. "Are you that tired?" Despite his demeanour of exhaustion, there is a sparkle in his eyes. "It's not that," says Edward. "I'm going to camp out on the deck. I'm going to make sure that those damn pigeons don't come back." "Really?" says Juliet, warming to him. "Maybe you do deserve me after all." While Juliet takes the kids to the park, Edward goes shopping to buy supplies for his mission. They rendezvous back at the house. Edward is wearing a new, lightweight camouflage jacket and beige pants. He looks like a fly fisherman or an army vet. There are black smudges under his eyes. Had he used her eyeliner? She pulls on her bush outfit, khaki three-phase zipper pants and a tan blouse. She wipes off her red lipstick and goes with a nude shade instead. Looks in the mirror. Feels decidedly German. She joins him out on the deck, puts a thermos flask and Dean's dinosaur-themed tin lunchbox on the table in front of him. "Sandwiches," she says, "and tea." Edward nods in approval, wonders offhandedly what is on the sandwiches. The provisions she has brought sit in contrast with the weapons on the table. A pneumatic pellet gun, with plenty of pretty copper-coloured BBs. a Birdex Quad Blaster QB4, which, according to the box, repelled pigeons with its ultrasonic waves. A broadband ray with fright visuals, a Nightmare Sound 4 speaker, a plastic action owl decoy with a movement center. He had already planted the additional spikes he had bought, on the handrail, on the lemon tree, on every inch of open shelf. Her decorative porcelain rabbits and cats now sat behind an aggressive row of metal skewers. She watches as he loads the air gun. "You really going to shoot them?" she says. "Yep," he says, flicking the safety catch off and looking through the rifle's sight. It makes her nervous. "Be careful of Layla," she says. "Don't shoot her." "What use is a cat if it doesn't catch the pigeons?" he says. She smacks him on the arm and the gun almost goes off. He forgets to put the safety back on. "I don't blame Layla," says Juliet. "Would you want a mouthful of vermin?" "That's a good point," he says. "The cat's a Bentworth, after all. I dare say that a dirty pigeon is quite beneath her station." Edward installs the various kits he had bought. Juliet assists him, holding ladders, passing screwdrivers, finding extension cables for the electric drill. As she sweeps up after him, she can't help noticing how much damage the birds have done. Their acidic droppings have corroded almost every surface she sees. She imagines her precious things covered in diseases and lice. Suddenly, she has to drop everything to viciously scratch her head. "Pigeon lice," she says, scrubbing away. "I'm sure I'm imagining it." Edward shudders in empathy. Eventually, they're all set up. The deck is unrecognizable, strewn with cables and lights and panels. "I like the fake owl," Juliet says. "Let's keep him after the pigeons are gone." "Watch this," says Edward. He runs up to the owl and waves at it. The owl screeches and his head swivels. His eyes are red lasers. "My God," she says. "That's enough to give anyone nightmares." Edward chuckles. "Isn't it wonderful?" He flaps his arms again and the owl responds. It reminds Juliet of the film The Exorcist. Edward keeps laughing. They send the kids to their Aunt Sarah for the afternoon, while they sit in their camping chairs drinking gin and tonics and eating kettle-fried chips. Layla has forgiven Edward, as evidenced by her sleeping on his lap. "Look at us," says Juliet. "If it wasn't the middle of summer, they could have matching blankets on their knees. Sitting here like an old couple." "We are an old couple," says Edward, looking through his binoculars at some birds in the distance. Juliet thinks he is looking quite handsome, despite his grey stubble. "We're probably wasting our time," says Juliet. "I mean, there's no way they're coming back now, with all these gadgets." "Never say never." Juliet has her iPad and is reading up on feral pigeons. When she finds something interesting, she reads it out loud. "Did you know that they don't migrate?" "Ha!" says Edward, pursing his lips. "Just our luck." "Did you know that they are monogamous?" "Are they?" "You only think of lovely, elegant animals being monogamous, don't you? Swans, for instance. Bulls." "What's that?" says Edward, sitting up straight. "I was just saying, shh," he says, putting a finger to his lips. "What's that sound?" Juliet listens. There is a murmuring, a distinct pigeon cooing coming from the roof. They abandon their drinks and scuttle over to the sound. "There's a pigeon in there," he says, "inside the bloody roof." "More than one," she says. "But how did they get in?" "I don't care. I'm going to take them out." Edward drags the ladder to the offending area and scrambles up. Juliet holds the ladder still. She hears, "Aha!" as he finds their hiding place behind a loose brick. She wants to call up, "Be careful!" but Edward hates it when she says that, so she keeps quiet instead. He forces out the brick and hits the wall next to it to dislodge any feathered vagrants. Neither of them are prepared for the swarm of birds that erupt from the opening, 100, 200 pigeons moving together, like an animated, monstrous mass. The fake owl screeches, Layla bolts. The horde flies around and then descend on the deck, on the shelves, on the flat screen, on the camping chairs, on Juliet and Edward. Everything is covered in twitching grey wings and black pearl eyes. The Bentworths scream and bat the birds away. Claws scrabble at their skin. Edward's face turns white and he grabs his chest. Juliet runs towards the pellet gun. The owl screeches again, sending a wave of birds up into the air, and Juliet shoots 6 birds in a row, without missing. Edward, slightly recovered, picks up Dean's nearby water pistol and starts shooting too. The Bird X quad blaster is sending out ultrasonic waves that make the ground vibrate. Juliet kills another 5 birds, which sends half the flock skittering off. 3 more birds with pellets in their hearts fall to the floor. And with a soft, wet smack of the third's body hitting the timber, the rest of the Legion wing themselves away. Downy feathers rain like snow down around them. Juliet and Edward sit together amongst the carcasses and lost plumes. Juliet has ribbons of fresh blood on her cheek where she had been scratched. She doesn't put down the rifle. Edward is still pale, and he has birdshot on the shoulder of his camo jacket. The sun is beginning to set. They look at each other. "I thought you were having a heart attack," she says. "Me too," he says. "But it's over now." "I don't think they're coming back," she says. "They are definitely not coming back," he says. "You made sure of that." Edward reaches over, and they hold hands. In the distance, on someone else's property, a pair of pigeons coo and settle in for the night. The end.